All right, plot heads, for the last month, we've been diving into the art and science of world building. So to cap it off, let's try something fun. Let's build an entire world from scratch, right here and right now. We're going to find a core idea and just build it out, layer by layer. We'll use our 5-layer world engine framework that we first talked about in my Avatar: The Last Airbender video. It all starts with layer 1, the foundational what if or core rule. We'll figure out the mechanics of the system layer, what kind of societies pop up in the social layer, the factions that form in the political layer, and finally, what pressure creates conflict in the pressure layer. You'll see how this structured approach can snowball from one little premise into a living, breathing universe. And then we'll turn the screws and see where it cracks, because that's where the story is. All right, everyone, let's get to it. Let's find our layer 1, the core rule. As I've mentioned before, every single world needs a sort of constitution, a single foundational what if. Everything else in your story should logically flow from this one idea. This first domino sort of kicks off your chain reaction. It dictates the shape of every piece that follows in your world building. So to keep things moving forward, and so that I'm not here spending hours coming up with millions of ideas, trust me, I love doing that. I've actually got a bunch of note cards I put right into the plot pot. Just to show you some of them before, so you know that I'm not bluffing here. I put a bunch of different ideas in here of different sort of basic premises from which we can find a story from. We're gonna mix them all up and we're gonna pick one. Let's see what we get. Okay. Everyone see that? That is man-induced ice age to stop global warming. I guess we can kind of say from this that we didn't just lose the fight to climate change, but we catastrophically ended up plunging the planet into some irreversible ice age. So let's commit to that. We want to establish our core rule here. So how about we make this ice age permanent? It kind of creates this sort of irreversible place where everyone has to adapt and build in this sort of wasteland. And from that one rule, a second one immediately follows. One that leads us into our second layer, because survival depends entirely on heat. Now, this is where we determine the concrete mechanics of the world and sort of the rules of survival that logically flow from our core rule. So first question on my mind right off the top is, how does a planet freeze solid? And how does it do it so fast? Well, we kind of already saw in it that it says it was man-made. So classic answer might be that this was kind of caused by maybe human hubris. So what if in the late 21st century, man, that's coming a little close to home, but humanity's facing kind of total catastrophe with global warming. So they maybe roll the dice on some sort of last-ditch network of atmospheric regulators, I guess, a kind of planetary sunshade. So for a few tragic years, it probably felt like a miracle. Temperatures maybe were stabilizing. We would have thought we'd actually won, but that makes things too clean and perfect. So maybe that system was kind of born from arrogance. Because it was working so well, they kind of got lazy about it. In that case, it probably has a fatal flaw, maybe an unforeseen solar event or something nobody planned for. Maybe the device that they sent to kind of cool the world off actually malfunctions. So instead of just gently cooling the world, maybe these regulators go haywire. And for a fun little example, maybe this is like Tropic Thunder, if you guys have seen it. That sort of...
Who left the fridge open?
So in this case, the apocalypse that probably followed would have been really swift, really cold. I mean, really in just a generation, temperatures would plummet, oceans would freeze over, ice sheets would just sort of swallow the continents. Basically, an ice age that should take thousands of years happens in maybe a few years, a decade maybe. And unfortunately, because of that, because of the lack of preparation, probably billions die. There are resource wars, desperate migrations toward maybe slightly less frozen locations. It's going to be total chaos. So by the time the regulators finally sputter and die, the damage has already been caused. It is basically permanent. Things will be cold for a long time. So now that we have this frozen Earth, what kind of caused it, what happened to the humans there, and sort of the rules and systems of it, this kind of forces our next logical choice. How do people actually stay alive? Well, they need a source of heat. Burning everything left from the old world, maybe not that sustainable. Maybe fuel would run out in a generation. They could try maybe Reviving nuclear power? I mean, that might be too complex, and facilities might be a little vulnerable if they're buried under snow. But maybe the logical place to find reliable long-term heat is maybe down, maybe geothermal. The survivors, maybe using whatever old world tech they could salvage, could have desperately drilled for warmth. They'd create maybe these colossal, giant rigged geothermal heat siphons or giant drills that drill down to capture that heat. Maybe they punched miles into the Earth's crust to be able to find a way to live. You see, each siphon could belch out a bubble of warmth, and that's where the first cities were built. And that little chain of cause and effect builds logic right into the foundation of your world. So what's really the problem here? I mean, these siphons can't just work forever, right? Well, of course not. It's a story. They must require something to function. So maybe there's some sort of rare degrading catalyst. Maybe these catalysts have to be replaced constantly. I mean, that's one way to make things interesting. They're maybe only found on certain geological formations hundreds of miles away, deep under the ice. And that single point of failure, that scarcity, is now an engine for conflict. And scarcity really kind of immediately creates another problem. How do you move between cities and these distant mining outposts? Well, the new atmosphere is probably way too violent for aircraft. They probably just freeze and fall out of the sky. So the only things that could have maybe survived the freeze would be maybe the biggest, toughest machines of the old world. Maybe they kind of remixed them and made them really cool. I mean, what I'm kind of imagining right now is maybe a sort of Mad Max kind of world, because I absolutely love Mad Max. So I love those inventive cars and vehicles. And so maybe they're kind of playing around with that, sort of Mad Max on ice. And no, not like Disney on ice. I'm thinking maybe these sort of giant multi-tracked industrial crawlers or kind of snow devices, snowmobile sort of things, jetting out across the ice. So now we've got the machinery of our world, we've got the rules, and now we go to our layer 3, the social layer, where we build the players, we build the cultures. The systems we just created should tell us who the people of this world really are. So the question isn't, what kind of people should we invent? What I want us to think instead of, what kind of people have to exist to make this broken world even function? So first, someone has to keep these geothermal siphons running, right? This absolute need for engineers and technicians would naturally create a sort of technological priesthood. You'd have these people that have the highest status. It's because they are the masters of maintenance and knowing what it means when the dying machinery starts to make groaning sounds. They are key and pivotal to society to survive. To them, old world technical manuals maybe are their sort of scripture. And maybe they think that things like improvisation or duct tape, or whatever they have to do is a sort of heresy. So next, who are the people that do the dangerous work of getting those catalysts that we're talking about earlier? That would probably fall to the frost miners. They'd be these tough, stoic people bonded by the brutal reality of working hundreds of miles from the warmth of the cities. Their job is essential, but their life is maybe all hardships, low status, they're on the road. Probably a lot of them don't make it, so there's a next man up kind of mentality. So they're probably a really kind of tight-knit clan or group of people that are bound by maybe superstitions about the ice, solemn rituals for the fallen, and maybe a very distinct pride about what they do. Also, who connects the miners out in the wasteland to these cities? Well, that's where you probably need to get that transport crew, our Mad Max crew that we were talking about. They're probably people that are traders, scouts, navigators who kind of pilot those giant crawlers or machines that they put together to traverse these dangerous environments. Maybe they live a more sort of nomadic life on the open ice. So they're probably very fiercely independent, not as tribalistic as some of these other groups. This sort of gives them a major contrast to the static, controlled lives of maybe city dwellers who stay there and stay warm. And for these people out on the ice, a person's word is probably their bond. They don't have much else to go off of out there. So as we build up this layer, these jobs would inevitably become distinct cultures. In a world like this with probably not a lot of options, what you do is probably really who you are. All right, so we have our people. We have our engineers, miners, transport crews, and probably just the rest of society living in these heat-controlled places. And as we've kind of seen, all these people are really defined by their role in this broken system. So now we can really get into the deeper stuff, the political layer. Because distinct social groups with different priorities almost never coexist peacefully. And once you have these groups, the factions basically build themselves. So all you have to do is ask, what does each group want? What do they control? Where do they butt heads? That's really your friction points. The engineers with their monopoly on the technology that creates heat obviously form the most powerful faction. It's logical because they become a sort of technocracy that believes in centralized control. They know the machines, they have the power. So let's maybe call them the Union. Their motto is probably something like, warmth is utility. I mean, to them, heat isn't a right as much as it's a resource you manage. An opposing force could maybe emerge from the people who control the trade routes. The transport crews could form some sort of merchant alliance. But their fierce independence makes me think of something more rugged, a sort of confederation of powerful clans that value freedom of movement above all else. So maybe let's call them the Nomads. If the Union controls the source of heat, the Nomads control the flow of survival and movement, and you can bet they charge a steep price for it. Just to make things a little more interesting, let's just throw in a wild card. What if not all the Siphons are failing? What if one proved to be uniquely stable, allowing a totally different kind of culture to develop? This could give rise to a sort of isolationist, spiritual people who believe warmth is some sacred gift, not just technology. We can call them maybe the Hearth-Keepers. They would look at the Union as soulless mechanics and the Nomads as these godless wanderers. This kind of gets into cult territory here. See, those three factions, this technocratic sort of Union, the libertarian Nomads, and the theocratic Hearth-Keepers, they're sort of locked in this hostile balance over dying machines, dwindling resources, and who has the power. So for a story to happen within this world, something has to break. Something has to set everything in motion. So this brings us to the final layer of our 5-layer world engine, the pressure layer. You see, a world without some sort of active pressure is just kind of sitting there as like a book on a shelf or a museum. This layer is where we really ask, what is breaking right now? So first, maybe the core technology itself is failing. These geothermal engines are maybe antiques. It's been a while since this event happened. Maybe they're held together with scavenged parts, and for some groups, prayers. See, the knowledge to build new ones is maybe long gone. It's an old guard that put them together in the first place. So this means the habitable zones are probably shrinking. Every year, maybe these engines are groaning louder, they're put together more with duct tape and whatever they can. Really, it's a sort of slow motion apocalypse happening inside the bigger one. And maybe second, the decay could create some pretty cool disasters. What happens when a failing engine actually starts to surge instead of get weaker? I mean, an uncontrolled pulse of heat to the surface, a lot of ice melting fast. I mean, we could call that maybe the thaw shock. These sort of flash melts could cause catastrophic collapses. I mean, basically swallowing entire camps or communities or severing vital trade routes in an instant. It's kind of this constant reminder that the ground beneath your feet is not really solid. Third, maybe the resources are running out. Once again, if everything's frozen over, if things are under sheets of ice, if there's not a lot of places people can go to, maybe there's not a lot of things keeping them going. Miners have to go farther and dig deeper for maybe smaller and smaller rewards. So once again, that scarcity dries up the cost of simply staying alive, and it pushes what's already a very delicate balance we created right to its breaking point. So now, how do these pressures combine to create an actual story? So let's stress test the engine. Let's start a crisis. Maybe a major Union-controlled city is in trouble. Its maybe geothermal siphon has suffered some sort of critical failure, and its temperatures are wildly fluctuating. Maybe a sort of catastrophic thaw shock is now predicted within the next month. All of a sudden now we have a ticking clock. So what really happens then? Well, the Union technicians know how to fix it, but the world's fundamental rules kick in. They need a rare stabilizing element, and the only known deposit maybe lies deep inside the territory of the isolationist Hearth-Keepers. And boom, right at that moment, we can now say, we've just ignited political tension. The Union has to go beg a faction they despise for help. The Hearth-Keepers agree, but they demand something priceless maybe in return. But even if they make the deal, the world's geography creates another obstacle. To get to their encampment, they probably have to go hundreds or thousands of miles across treacherous, shifting ice paths that are maybe made more unstable by these heat fluctuations that are going on. So who are the people that can make that journey? Well, we've kind of already built that into our story, didn't we? That's where maybe the people from the Union are going to have to rely on the nomad trade clans. See, all of this is happening under that ticking clock we established earlier. That dying machine, the encroaching winter storms, and the imminent threat of the thaw shock. So one broken part just sparked a multi-group crisis, forcing every faction into really life or death choices, and really engaging every single system we built up until this point. Just because I want you guys to see the wealth of possibilities that you can build out of the world you created, I want you to notice that this crisis is just one possible story. Because we built the world through these logical layers: core rule, systems, society, politics, and pressure. It now naturally produces endless scenarios. And this is where you get to really come in and have fun with it. So your job isn't really to invent a plot out of thin air and then try to plug in all the other pieces. It's really to look at your world and choose where to apply pressure and decide whose eyes we're going to see it through. For instance, a character-driven story could follow a young union technician who discovers a systemic flaw. Maybe not just one of the Siphon, but maybe an entire network, something that the leadership has maybe completely covered up to prevent mass panic. Now, does that character risk everything to leak the truth to the Nomads? Maybe hoping that their ingenuity can help find a solution, but knowing it could maybe potentially start a war. Or how about an exploration thriller? A Nomad scout on a long-range patrol stumbles upon pre-freeze military submersible frozen deep within the ice, and maybe it has some sort of lost schematics for fusion power, which could fundamentally change the entire world. But maybe the issue is that it's in a thaw shock zone and her distress call is maybe intercepted by a rival clan or a union patrol. And now it's this race for that resource to find that schematic. And you see, that's what I really wanted to show you guys, that each of these stories emerges directly from the systems we established. We started with one simple rule: the world is frozen solid. And by just asking what happens next, we followed a real chain of cause and effect to deduce an entire world and provide endless possibilities for the story on top. We followed the 5-layer world engine. We started once again with the core rule, built the system layer on top, saw the social layer emerge from that, established the political layer and its factions, and then we set it all in motion with the pressure layer, revealing the stories waiting inside. This shows how a structured process doesn't have to stifle creativity. In fact, it channels it and opens up so many possibilities logically born from the world you've created. And once again, I'm Brian, this is Plotluck. And if you've ever loved a story, felt let down by one, or dreamed of telling your own, pull up a chair, hit subscribe, and let's stir the plot together. That's a wrap.